lecture to you. I'll try to do that. Mete is a childhood friend of mine, a friend from time immemorial, let me say, and a colleague at present. And he's a polymath, and what I'm going to say, of course, will not do any justice to the purpose of describing him, but I'll try to summarize. Mete is a senior research consultant at Peace Research Institute Oslo Cyprus Center. He has been a political analyst and freelance writer since 1995, and since 2014 he is a columnist for Poly magazine of Havadis newspaper and the online Gazete 360 in the north. He primarily researches and writes about the Cyprus conflict, Cypriot cultural history, immigration, Islam, and ethnic and religious minorities in Cyprus. He has taught at Near East University and Cyprus International University and served as a board member of the Turkish Cypriot Education Foundation. He is currently serving as a board member of the Turkish Cypriot Human Rights Foundation and is a member of the editorial board of the Cyprus Review. Since January 2005, he has led Prio-Cyprus Center's project on demography in Cyprus. Much of his work is concentrated on immigrants and settlers in the north of the island. His monographs, Beyond Numbers, and Is the Turkish Cypriot Population Shrinking?, were published as Prio reports. He has also been engaged in a large-scale EU 7th Framework Project on Conflict and Cultural Heritage, as well as in another EU-funded program on internal displacement in the island. He works on Sufi Islam in Cyprus and is a regular reporter on Islam in Cyprus for the Muslims in Europe yearbook. He's currently working with co-author Rebecca Bryant on a book manuscript about the period of Turkish Cypriot enclavement between 1963 and 1974 and the later transformation of enclaves into an unrecognized state. Besides his regular appearances and commentaries in local media sources, Mete has published academic articles in venues such as Ethnic and Racial Studies, American Ethnologist, Middle Eastern Studies, Journal of Modern Greek Studies, and Cyprus Review. Apart from popular academic writing, Mete is also a composer who has produced 3 albums as well as music for numerous documentary films. So I leave you with him now. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank Kostas and Rita Severis Foundation for this kind invitation to be here. Of course, this long introduction embarrassed me a little bit. I feel like, this immigrant work is come, I can't do anything.
That's the idea.
No, I mean, I call myself a little bit like a guerrilla researcher. I have too much interest and I'm in people's daily affairs. That also was, we could apply that to some Christian who were going to tekkes and seeing the dervishes there, and the dervishes used to come with these magical things and curing certain illnesses and everything. So it was mainly daily needs, in a way, making these habits to become a tradition among the people, and it was affecting their rituals, and sometimes becoming an established kind of different way of praying than the official Sunni Medrese Islam. These are certain places, for example, where holy people are buried. People used to go to these places. Still, some people go, put candles, and have votives. For example, if my child passes the exams, university exams, I donate you this much, something kind of traditions. This was Hazreti Ömer place near Kyrenia. It's used to be called Ziyaret place. Ziyaret means visit. And these places were tended to be also shared. Like in these places you had Christians coming as well. But interestingly, in these places you had different understanding of the place. They were shared, but they were shared in the sense that Christians were going there believing that it was saying somebody. Muslims were going there and thinking that they were the warrior dervishes who died during the Arab conquest. And for Greeks it was those who were defending the Cyprus against the Arab raiders. So sometimes the interpretations were different, but it was a holy place for both. But the most important thing was the efficacy. Efficacy was there. So they believe in the efficacy of the place. This is another one, Saranda. Saranda in Greek, how do you say it? Yes, Saranda is Kırklar in Turkish. It was again a shared place. Anyway, apart from the two aforementioned broad Muslim categories that I talked about, the folk Islam and the city urban Islam, there's another category, mystical Islam, Tekke Islam we can call it. This was evident in rural as well as in urban settings, and incorporated both orthodox and heterodox aspects in it. They were giving mystical interpretation of Islam. They differed from folk Islam in that the latter was not institutionalized. The folk Islam was daily, they didn't have leaders or they didn't have people who were guiding them. So the clergy wasn't there in folk Islam. People were doing their rituals themselves. But in Sufi Islam, you have a kind of clergy there. Dervish, sheikh, kutub, and different levels of hierarchy also is there. But the difference from Medrese Islam, which is the establishment, the Sunni Islam, Sufi Islam used non-orthodox methods, such as music, poetry, which was attracting people, and they had a missionary kind of tendency as well. So the dervishes usually were the people who entered the conquered areas and start converting people and winning supporters, in a sense of winning people for Muslims. So it had a missionary tendency. That's why most of the Sufi tekkes are these shared places, because these places were probably Christian places. By taking over, the Sufis were allowing the Christians to come to places, but in their mind, with the agenda of someday they will convert them. On the other hand, Sufi Islam kept the people in Islam because it was more, I shouldn't use entertainment or entertaining thing, but it was people, they used, for example, zikr, sema, this kind of relaxation, like you go there and you repeat certain words and you share, you become a whole, you become part of the more mystical being, kind of thing. So it was keeping people in Islam more than the boring Medrese Islam. A lot of rules and regulations and everything. So you have 5 times the namaz, and that's it. You cannot use music, is forbidden. You cannot dance, is forbidden, and this and that is forbidden. So the Sufi Islam kept the ordinary people in Islam, in reality. John Barnes, who did a marvelous work on Sufi Islam, talks about it as Sufi orders represented an infinity of branches and beliefs and were closely associated with common people, providing with a popular faith that was more accessible than Orthodox Islam. On the other hand, when we look at the economics of Islam, then we realize there's this Vakif system connected to the existence of Islam, because all these institutions, whether it's Sufi or Medrese, had to have an income to survive. And most of these religious buildings, it could be mosque, tekke, masjid or dergah and other institutions such as schools, madrasas, libraries, orphanages they had, soup kitchens they had for people, needed money. So the FGAF system supplied that money. So what was this FGAF system? Of course, before I go into the decline of the FGAF system, I should give a summary. Vakif is a donation. In Islam, there is no private property. Allah owns the whole world. So Khalif or Sultan, who's representing the Islam, is entitled to control the property on behalf of Allah. But the only way to keep Sultan's hands away from the property was to donate the property directly to Allah, which was Vakif. So you, in a way, skip the political bit and the Sultan and the hegemonic part of the institutions, and you say, for example, that you are assigned a farm to look after as a sipahi system. Again, was like a feudal system, but different than feudal system. It wasn't inheritary. You were given a property to make profit out of it and send the tax to Islam and keep some for yourself. But you can donate this property for a religious purpose, saying that the income of this property will go to the upkeep of this tekke. And you write a document saying that these are the administrators of this vakif, they will make this farm work and give this much percentage of the money to the upkeep of the mosque, and the rest they can keep it for themselves as salaries to make the place work. So Sufi orders were functioning like that as well. So all the Sufi orders, actually, they were also connected to professional, what do you call them, not orders, but guilds, yeah. They were connected to the guilds. For example, let's say silk makers had their own guild, and this guild had chosen a saint, kind of representing one kind of tariqah, which was the path to Islam, one of these orders, to sort of give a spiritual guidance to these guilds, but also, keep them as competitive or secure from unfair competition. Of course, it's more complicated. I should not get lost in the footnote and continue. So all these FGAFs were, in a way, try to keep the Sultan's interference or the imperial administration's interference, and keep some of the income for yourself, so your kids can inherit it, because as Vakif, when you appoint an administrator's sons become administrator, and the son's son and son's son, so it becomes something like, so many people started turning the properties assigned to them into vakifs. So when we come to 19th century, it was like almost 2/3 of the Arab land was vakif. So it was a big loss, actually, for the emperor. Everybody has their vakifs, and the state cannot interfere in it. So what Sultan did in 19th century, Mahmud, starting with Mahmud, here is, let me say, with Sultan Mahmud, new reforms come about to centralize the FGAF, in a way to control the FGAF. So by doing that, the state got rid of the actual administrators who started the Vakif, or whose ancestors started the Vakif, and started to appoint civil servants to control the FGAF and suck the income and take them to Istanbul. Many of the Vakifs, many of the Sufi orders, for example, during that point, during that time was destroyed. All their income, this one again, because their income was taken over by the state, by centralization. They established a Minister of Vakif in the name of modernization. So, okay, these orders were in a way a little bit anarchic. They were also, you know, they were keeping the money for themselves, but they were keeping it in Cyprus at least, or wherever they were. So the income of all these places were staying in the island. But by centralizing it, money started to flow out. So when the British came, I move on. This is CVAR, the first Vakif administrator. When British took over, they started appointing a British member as well to control the Vakif. And the first thing British did, of course, was to investigate what Vakif is, what Vakif properties are, how many Vakif properties are there and everything. And Severis came up with this conclusion that the Vakif treasury was empty. Mosques and buildings almost in ruins. Schools neglected. Everything connected with religion had suffered. All interests and wants were subordinated to the greed of the Ministry of Vakif in Istanbul, and the grasping wants of trustees, who in most cases were only trustees in name, appointed new trustees. So, usually when Turkish speakers talk about Vakif struggle, is the British took the Vakif property. They did. I mean, I will go into that as well. British had a lot of faults to do with the Vakif properties. But the first distraction came from the actual Istanbul itself, from the Sultan's reforms, the modernization. I mean, unintended consequence of this modernization. So, many of the Mulhaka and Mazbuta types, Mulhaka and Mazbuta, should I go into that description? Mulhaka is more like the administrators are known, Mazbuta is you don't know the administrator, and it's a Haramain Vakif, they call it. It's usually donations to Mette. So you take the income of the farm here and send that income to Mette to look after the Kabe and the profits areas. So these Vakifs had been illegally transformed into Icareteyn Vakifs, which allowed the occupier the freedom to transfer property usage to third persons and pass on the rights of occupation and transfer to unlimited generation of inheritors. So in this case, it was like a move to private property. You know? So it wasn't a Sultan property. It moved away from the Vakif's purpose. They took lump sum money and they gave it to someone who could do whatever they liked with it until he died, and his kids can also inherit the right to use this places. So it became almost like a private property. In several instances, the original mutawallis of Vakif properties illegally sold these assets to tax farmers or peasants who cultivated such lands and then fled the island back to Anatolia. The conversion of Mazbuta Vakifs into Icareteyn also paved the way for these properties to be turned as the next unlawful step into private properties and completely alienated from the area. Sufi tekkes and orders had also lost out from the 19th century, as I explained earlier. Until then, most of them had, in addition to providing an array of basic welfare services for the benefit of Muslim communities, function as important spiritual and social centers. While true that by the end of the 18th century, most tekkes resembled, as I explained earlier, feudal entities, their occupants often improperly redirecting Vakif revenues to their relatives and heirs. It was also true that they were still the only representatives of Islam with the substantial direct influence over rural communities. So you had a lot of villages around the island, no mosque, no imam. So it was all these wandering dervishes or traveling dervishes going from village to village to circumcise the people, to give Bayram prayers, to have Friday prayers, and keeping the people, reminding them that they were Muslims, let's say. And in Cyprus, too many Muslim settlements were to be found in what were then remote locations, frequently want for properly functioning mosques or a regular imam who could guide the people in their prayers. Anyway, I explained this. It was the dervishes. The detrimental impact of 19th century Ottoman reforms, particularly the general negligence of religious authorities and the initial lagging educational opportunities of the Muslim community also helped explain the tendency, especially of the more religiously neglected, non-observant Muslim Cypriot peasants to convert to Christianity. During this reform period, especially in 1857, they lifted the punishment, which was blocking the track from converting from Muslimhood to Christianity. So the people could not get punishment for that action. So many villages, individuals started to sort of, because there was no hoja, there was no imam, they were poor, and there was a rising, rich and powerful church in Cyprus especially, tempted these people to convert to Christianity. For example, like we talk about Bombagis, Bombagis were this hybrid population, no one knows what they were, but they were these people who followed both religions at the same time, a very pragmatic way. All this disappeared from the fabric of the Cyprus. This Englezalis, you know him, I think he wrote a fantastic book on Church of Cyprus, but I usually use this quote he gave. This is, to give a taste of the period before 1900, I note that the credit for saving 10 villages of Linobombagis in Limassol district from Latin propaganda and securing them for Hellenism belongs to the Limassol moneylenders. At 40 and 50%, I don't know how he calculated that, who at the church's instigation immediately ceased to lend to their formerly Turkish, now Maronite customers until they had forced them to become Orthodox. So, as you can see, there is a lot of economy is playing a role in conversion. These people were first open to the Catholic Church's missionaries' activities, especially in Limassol area. These wine villages, a lot of wine villages, because while these were happening, the Mufti in Nicosia was writing a letter to Istanbul saying that 10 villages in Limassol just converted to Christianity, 15 villages in Paphos just converted to Christianity. Please help us, send us imam, send us money. Kind of alarm bells was made. So first Catholics arrived, converted them to Catholicism. Here it says Maronite, of course, Maronites are Catholic. But then, with the help of moneylenders, they became Orthodox. When we look at the British period, now I finished the Ottoman reform unintended consequences and moved to the British, what British did with Islam. The British often turned a blind eye, albeit in the name of the general public good, to the aspiration by civil authorities of various faculty positions. Because they were modern, they had modern ideas of running a city, so they established a municipality. But before, the water belonged to Vakif. So it was the Vakif deciding on who gets the water, how much the water. But of course, British took the water and gave it to the municipality to deliver it more efficiently and more equal way to the citizens. So the citizenship started to become important, and certain actions FGAF lost. Again, moreover, although the governing authorities did not immediately act on CVAR rationalizing proposal that the government should take over Vakif property in its entirety. This was his suggestion at the end of his report that he wrote in 1882. So he's taken example from the Russians, what they did in the Caucasus, and we do the same thing. We take over Vakif and then we give it to the peasants as a land reform and whatever. So that didn't happen immediately, but certain laws the British changed. For example, in 1926, the colonial government abolished the revenue-generating tithe. Tithe was a tax from income. You do a harvest, 1/5 of that harvest went to Vakif, for example. So almost 50% of Vakif's income was coming from tithe revenues. So when the tithe was abolished, of course, Vakif lost a lot of property. They gave them a lump sum of money, but wasn't enough, and again, is big loss economically of the Islam. Another legal decision transformed the ijaretain properties into mulk, private property. As I said earlier on, was anyway some kind of private property. So they gave them a compensation. Vakif, I mean, the British gave Vakif some compensation over a relatively short time, but I mean, it wasn't a progressive compensation. So they gave them £1,000 a year compensation. So in 15 years, 1,000 lost its value, but continued. And it's still in the Republic of Cyprus constitution is £1,000 to be paid to Vakif for the ijaretin properties, which became mulk and private. I cut the British period as well. There were a lot of other things, of course, abolishment of the muftiship. It was bad and good because in one hand, they were copying Turkey's modernization as well. In Turkey, when they abolished the caliphate, immediately a year later, here in Cyprus, the British said, oh look, I mean, your mother land adopted this policy, so why not turning muftiship into a civil servant? So muftiship, who was elected by the religious people, who was the representative of the Muslim people in Cyprus, became the civil servant of the British, appointed by the British. So that was a big blow again on Islam, at least psychologically. Then Kemalism. I think that's the biggest flaw over Islam in Cyprus. All the reforms in Turkey were immediately adopted in Cyprus. Why? I mean, there wasn't any Mustafa Kemal around going, forcing people to take the çarşaf away or ban things. It was, I think, it has to do with living in a Christian environment and being put in a place, I mean, to be respected in a modern sense. They were copying or mimicking the Christian majority in that sense. So they thought by adopting Latin alphabet, they were going to get more respect from British because they were going to be equal. And in Kemalism, inherently, it has this Orientalist element in it. But in this case, the Orientalist element is within. So you kill the Oriental within. And with the Kemalist nationalism, in order to execute the Oriental within, the dress codes were changed, the Quran and all the Arabic script was changed. Later they adopted Turkish as the language for ezan, for example, until 1950s, and later it was again because the government in Turkey changed, Democrat Party re-adopted the Arabic for ezan. Immediately here they changed as well. So they were copying both Turkey and trying to be acknowledged by Turkey. We are good Turks living under enemy. Help us. But we are secular Turks like you imagine, like you wish. So all these interaction between Turkey and the Turkish peoples were all this presenting yourself as a pure Kemalist, white Turks that they were imagining in Turkey to turn the rest of the population in Turkey to be. Of course, meanwhile, I mean, this is an excerpt from a newspaper from 1936. Please read it. I mean, the British decided to do a madrasa or a Muslim school because there were no educated imams left in Cyprus. So they wanted to educate some people to become imams because someone has to bury the dead and whatever. And John Rifat, his name is. John comes from Jeune, means young Turk. He was saying, I would prefer to go hungry rather than partake in the construction of theological school. They have made us liars, perverted our thoughts, shattered our souls, made us sleep with our eyes open, degraded our morals, prevented our progress and development, denied us the pleasure of life, and made us lose our personalities and taught us to be slaves of the powerful. He's talking about Ottoman Empire and Islam. Can you imagine? While other nations have slowly reached the stage of ending the existence of self-seeking agents to the other world, these dens and lairs of wolves and foxes are trying to fire their last bullet at us by opening a theological school. So, this was the mentality of the rising Kemalist nationalist elite of that period. But not only the actual Islam, syncretic Islam was affected because Turkish nationalism has this Puritan, this obsession with cleanness. The one type of man has to be there. So here, as you can see, this is another excerpt or a section from a Halkın Sesi newspaper from 1954. They heard that some people went to Apostolos Andreas and donated lamb or something, I don't know, motifs, things like that. So they went curious, you know, and here he goes. Some of our birthrates forget.
Worked well for converting?
Yes, but different periods, yeah, different periods. For example, in the 19th century reforms that I talked about, they banished Bektaşism, for example, which was similar to Alevi thing, but it was a Sufi order, very, very important Sufi order. Again, in the guild arrangement, they were the Sufi, they were the spiritual leaders of the Janissaries. So when Mahmud wanted to banish the Janissary system and create a new army, they banished the Bektaşis because the Bektaşis had a lot of influence on the Janissaries and they were revolting constantly. So the whole heterodox section of Islam disappeared. Not disappeared, but they went underground. And who took over? It was the state Islam took over and some privileged tarikats, other orders, like Mevlevi tarikat became like the state's tarikat, and also Naqshbandi tarikat became like the state's, more Sunni, and they were more loyal to the Sultan. I mean, still when you go to Naqshbandi dergahs, you see Abdulhamid picture there, they praise the Ottoman Empire and everything. So you could see still this loyalty continue. Of course, what Kemal did in 1926 was to banish everything. So there was no Mevlevi left, no Naqshbandi left, there was no Sufi Islam left. So when Sufi Islam was out, or went underground, some Sufi Islam in Turkey became radicalized when they were underground. You know, because they continued somehow, but in more radical sense, and there was more problematic tendency appeared from there by suppressing this actual Islam, which was popular Islam among the people.
I wanted to ask whether it's my understanding with the picture that you've given that until the 17th, 18th, 19th century, things were pretty fluid as to who was who. Is that an accurate understanding that I have? Didn't the Sultan care about that? Didn't he want to promote Islam in his land, or did he was
No.
just happy to get money from
Exactly.
all sorts of
They had
people?
iltizam system. Iltizam system is auction. Auctioning a position. So you pay this much money to become the governor of Cyprus. So what you do is to get that much amount of tax to pay you rent to Sultan. So you didn't care. You needed Christians because they were paying the tax, not the Muslims. Muslims were half.
Okay, so there was
Yeah.
so there were differences. You were treated
Of course.
differently if you were a
Of
Muslim.
course,
If you
of
were
course.
okay.
Christians were paying double
Okay.
of what Muslims
That's
were paying.
I would like to ask the double question. The first one is this kind of situation that was created specific in Cyprus, or it happened in all other countries that they happen? And the second thing, don't you think that finally this kind of thing, it was the fight between what we call the civil society and the religious people?
Yeah, I wouldn't call Mustafa Kemal civil society. It's very anti-civil society we're talking about, and also the Sultan cannot be civil society. Actually, the Sufi orders were some kind of civil society in this sense. The other way round. The other thing why I sympathize the Sufi orders, they were not violent, majority of them. You had radicalization, as I say, when they were suppressed, but they were peaceful. Because their intention was to convert, to win. If they don't, it's okay. You know, they were so pragmatic. Very pre-modern but post-modern. Anything goes. It was in the dergahs. You know, they were adapting very easily. You know, in that sense, coexistence was easier.
The first question.
Andreas,
can I come to a more current affair, please?
Yeah.
On a recent trip from Lefkosia to Famagusta, outside Lefkosia I saw this huge mosque
Yeah.
under construction. I was not very pleasantly surprised. It even has lots of rooms outside. It looks like a Christian monastery, but of course with the architecture of the mosque. How are Turkish Cypriots reacting to this? Obviously, Erdogan's influence over Cyprus.
Yeah. The architecture-wise, it's a monastery architecture. I mean, the Ottoman architecture is the copy of Hagia Sophia. I mean, look at
Yeah.
most of the mosques.
I meant
It's
from
the replicas of the-
a religious point of view.
Yeah,
mostly.
yeah. It is a theological school.
Mhm.
Behind, you have theological school established there. It was an interesting debate within the Turkish community. So I don't want to I try to sort of myself out from this and try to answer this. For a long period, Islam was under persecution within the Turkish people because you had Muslims, you had people who were believers, who wanted to send their kids to learn Quran or how to pray. There was none. There was no school, not even a selective course in the schools. And every time they attempted to do a summer course or weekend course like in churches they do, it was suppressed or being attacked by the secular forces, like the teachers union, like the others. They couldn't tolerate it. They saw it as like that guy in 1930s were saying, it's the dark forces will take over and everything. So I think this sentiment was a bit exaggerated sentiment, didn't allow a space for those believers to survive or to exist. And of course, in Turkey, the power changed. AK Party came. Now you have a religious government who sympathizes this kind of sentiment. So you had the people going to AK Party complaining about this. And immediately, of course, AK Party is not a very democratic party, and more we are watching the attitude there. So without asking or finding a middle way, they said, what? No religious school? Nothing? We will build you a college. Cypriots like to call their schools college because they have been under British, so we will build you a college and also most big one, like Severis or like whatever. You know? So it was kind of a reactionist thing. Of course, a weak or subaltern can react, but if the hegemon, the ones in power react, it's not very nice. So, but we shouldn't mix the other mosques. You have these MAC mosques being built everywhere, white, in every village as well. These big ones are new, recent ones, because of this kind of reaction, and it's like with the sentiment of punishing Turkish Cypriots or imposing things on Turkish Cypriots. The other small ones are more like, at least they found an excuse. They said that all the churches which were converted in '74 into mosques will be de-mosquized and we will build a mosque. So and leave the churches alone, so they can be restored and use their churches or something else. Okay? So the 38 mosques that have been built for the last 10 years, the other number I can give you is 9 new mosques were built until 2002. Since 2002, 38 new mosques. But the number of the mosques didn't increase because churches were used as mosques. Okay? So at least there isn't some kind of excuse there. Of course, architecture-wise, aesthetic-wise, there's a lot of problem. Even I'm sure Hoca here complains about the architecture, so that because we have this Cypriot architecture in our old mosque, it could have been adapted. But I know the reason. The architects in FGAF, they did a model type B and type A. So bigger mosque type B, small mosque type A, and they started building MAC mosques. You know, so but at least there is some kind of excuse there. But these other big ones is also very nationalist attitude, because don't forget that Turkish Cypriots or Turks or Turkish nationalism have very little amount of symbols to show. They are not like Greeks to show pillars and all these writings and Parthenon and so they have flag, okay, and minaret. So building minaret Turkifies the place. So that's why nationalists don't mind the thing. Especially in 1950s, it was interesting. I found this document. They were planning to have prefabric minarets for each, so that they can be more visible as Turkish villages. So there's this other dynamics involved in it as well.